So this is the second part of JSP Basics. So last week we covered real basics of JSP. Today what we are going to cover include a few other things. For example, dynamic content generation techniques in JSP, especially using Java code inside JSP page. It's called the JSP scripting elements. How we can do include and forward to other JSPs, and the concept of directive and scope objects and error handling. So let's move on. So dynamic content generation techniques in JSP. So there are several techniques that could be used to create dynamic contents with JSP technology, and which one you want to use depends on size and complexity of the project and requirements of the project as well, in terms of usability of the code and maintainability and degree of robustness. So there are actually 6 different techniques I introduced in the next slide. They are from simple to incrementally complex techniques. Okay, so let's look into those things. So first technique is you are going to have a Java code inside your JSP page, and that's something that we are going to cover in this presentation. And you can call Java code indirectly within JSP. Again, it will be covered here. And third scheme is use Java beans with JSP. Actually, it will be covered in next presentation, not this presentation. In terms of JSP, actually I divided into 3 different topics: JSP Basics I, JSP Basics II, and how you use Java beans with JSP, because that's kind of important topic. So I separated out into another presentation. So that's something that we are going to cover. So this is C is something we are going to cover next week. And you can also develop and use your own custom tags, or you can use standard tag library called the JSTL, or you could use third-party custom tags. And then you could follow MVC design patterns, and then you could actually use proven MVC frameworks such as a Spring MVC and things like that. So we have in fact 7 different approaches, and again this is the simplest and this is the most sophisticated scheme, I would say. Of course, simple scheme has a cost. This is not really recommended practice, as you will see in a few minutes. Alright, so let's talk about how we can have Java code inside JSP page. So in this case, you are going to have a Java code in JSP page. As I said before, it is suitable only for a very simple web application, is because having Java code in JSP page is hard to maintain, and it's hard to reuse the code, and it's also hard to understand for web page authors. So it's not recommended for relatively sophisticated applications, because it does not provide adequate separation between content and presentation. You can call Java code indirectly. So in this case, you are going to develop separate Java utility classes. They are external to JSP page, and inside JSP page, you are going to have a minimum Java code that actually invoke those utility classes. So it provides a better separation of contents from presentation than previous method. It does provide better reusability and maintainability than the previous method, but still not enough separation between contents and presentation, because you still have Java code in your JSP page. Okay, so next scheme is use Java beans. So here you are going to create Java beans that contains a business logic, and then you are going to leverage built-in JSP facility for creating Java bean instances and getting and setting Java beans properties. So JSP has a syntax that could be used for creating Java bean and getting and setting Java beans properties. Again, we are going to talk about this one in our next presentation next week. So it's easier to use for web page authors because there is no Java code in JSP pages, and it certainly provides better reusability and maintainability than previous two methods. Next scheme is developing and using custom tags. So custom tags are very sophisticated components, and so it's much more powerful than Java Beans because you can do a lot more than just get and set a method that you can do with a Java Bean. It provides high level of reusability and maintainability and robustness. However, the downside of custom tags is that development of custom tags are very difficult, especially if you're using JSP 1.2. It got simpler with the JSP 2.0, but still creating custom tags is relatively cumbersome task. So instead of creating your own custom tags, you could use standard tag library, JSTL. So basically JSTL is a collection of standard custom tags. And or you could use third-party custom tags. So again, there are actually several open source and commercial custom tags available. Example is Apache Struts project. And then you might want to design your MVC design pattern. So model view controller design pattern is very popular for web application development environment. So you might actually create MVC based framework for your environment. The last scheme is instead of creating your own MVC framework, why not use a proven MVC framework out there? For example, Spring MVC, Java Server Faces, Apache Struts 1 and 2, Tapestry, and Wicked, and there are in fact many more MVC frameworks out there that you can pick and choose and use. Okay, so what I have covered so far is the various schemes with the JSP that you can use for creating dynamic contents. In the rest of the course, we are going to cover some of these things, and today we are going to cover A and B, basically inserting Java code inside your JSP page. And again, this is very discouraged practice, but nonetheless, we are going to learn how to do it. So JSP scripting element is basically lets you insert Java code in your JSP page. Okay, so there are three different forms of JSP scripting elements. So you can specify Java expression here using this notation, %sign and equal, and script that is Java code. Okay, so that's something you can specify with a %sign, and declarations you can specify with %sign and declaration, the exclamation mark, and then you can have a declarations. So let's see examples of this. Expressions first. So expression is basically evaluated and is converted into a string, and string is then inserted into Servlet's output stream directly. So the result is something like out.println and your expression. Okay. Inside this expression, you can use implicit object. You will see examples of implicit objects such as a session object, request object, and things like that. Okay, so you can use two different formats. I showed you can use this format, right? Or you can use JSP : expression, this syntax. So this is XML, right? And this is not XML. So in general, XML based format is preferred, but either one is fine. By the way, semicolons are not allowed for expressions. Okay, so this is an example. So in this case, we are creating a new data object, and then it will create the string out of it. So basically, you're calling toString method of the data object. So here, this is the expression. And here we are using math method to generate random number. Again, it will be converted into string and then put into the output stream of the response. You can use implicit objects such as you can actually get the request object. So here you can get remote host the address, you can also call getParameter method of the request object to get your value of your parameter. You can get the server information, you can get the ID of the session ID and things like that. So you can have all this implicit object being used inside the expression. Scriptlets is basically Java code. So it's used to insert arbitrary Java code into Servlet's JSP service method. Okay? So by using Java code, you can do things expression alone cannot do, such as following. Because expressions, you cannot have any left side, let's say, variable. So you can set response headers and status codes, writing to a server log, updating database, executing code that contains loops and conditionals. Basically, any Java code can be inserted as scriptlets. Again, the syntax that you can use is %, or you can use JSP:\scriptlet. Okay, and then you can have any kind of Java code. So example is like this. So here we are getting a query string from the request object, and we set the query data, and then you can actually print things out. Okay, so you cannot have these things in your expression. Okay, so you can maybe have this one as expression, right? Okay, but you cannot have this part in expression. This one you are actually setting response type. Okay. Because it's a pure Java code, you can have the semicolon inside scriptlets. So here you can have a loop inside the Java code because it's again a Java code. So here we are looping of items of cart and created iterator object, and we perform some iteration. And so for each item in the shopping cart, we are basically displaying this. Okay, and then end of while. So some results. So this is the result of executing the previous code. Okay, so JSP page fragment. Suppose we have the following JSP fragment. So this is an expression, right? This second one is an expression, and this is a Java code, scripted code, and then we have pure HTML. So when JSP page that contains these three things get compiled into Servlet, this is basically what happens here. So for HTML fragments, static HTML fragments are sent to the output stream as it is, no change. Expressions will be evaluated, and then it's going to be sent as out.println. So in this case, out.println is being executed after this expression, and JavaScript code is directly inserted inside JSP service method. So you can see the difference. Okay, declarations. Declarations are used to define variables or methods that get inserted into the main body or servlet class. So it's actually outside of the JSP service method, the things that you want to declare, because you want to declare something outside a particular method in a class. Implicit objects are not accessible to declarations, and usually used with expressions or scriptlets. And so for initialization and cleanup in JSP pages, you could use declarations to override JSP init or JSP deploy method. Okay, so instead of using JSP init in JSP destroy, you can actually perform similar things with the declarations. So the declaration is a format is the % and exclamation mark, or you can have JSP : declaration, and then declarations, and then the ending tag. Okay, so this is an example. So here we basically declare a method. Okay, and here we are also declaring a method, and this is the Java code. I'm sorry, this is the expression. Sorry. Okay. Okay, so resulting servlet code is something like this. So, random heading, so that's basically what we have, right? So you are declaring that one right here. Okay. And, oops. And because this is the expression, random heading is supposed to be inside out println. Okay. Okay, so this is other examples of declaration. So here we are declaring a variable and JSP init method and JSP destroy method. Okay, so XML syntax. So these are the XML syntax that were introduced in JSP 1.2, and so instead of using this notation of %sign things, you can use these XML notations. Basically, by having these things in XML notations, you can actually do XML validation, and you can use some XML tools. Alright, so moving forward, including and forwarding to JSP. So we have covered including and forwarding with Servlet, so it's very similar concept. So including contents in a JSP page is that you are going to get the output from an included content. So the calling JSP page still has a control in terms of sending back the response, meaning the calling the JSP page is responsible for generating response message. As you will see later on, for forwarding, so in that case, the forwarded page will be responsible for generating response. Okay, so in terms of including contents in JSP page, there are two mechanisms for including another web resource. In this case, it could be Servlet or JSP. You can use include directive, or you can use JSP include element. So include directive is processed, because it's a directive, is processed when JSP page is translated into Servlet class. So effect of the directive is to insert the text contained in another file, either static content or another JSP page, in the including JSP page. Okay. So it is used to include banner content, copyright information, or any chunk of content that you might want to reuse in another page. So for example, so this is the include directive, okay, %sign and @ and you want to include the file name. For example, if I want to include the result of this banner.jsp, then you can use this directive. Or you can use JSP include elements. So example wise, it is going to be JSP include and then the name of the JSP page. Okay. So the difference between include directive versus JSP include is that you won't use include directive if the file changes rarely, because it's faster than JSP include. Use JSP include for contents that changes often, and use JSP include if which page to include cannot be decided until main page is requested. So some guideline. Okay, so as opposed to including, in which the calling page still has a responsibility of creating response, forwarding to another web component, meaning forwarding to another JSP page or another servlet, is actually giving control to the forwarded page. So here, if you are using JSP:forward to page to main the JSP page, then this JSP page is the one that is responsible for generating response message. You can also pass along a parameter. Okay, so when you call forward to a new page, you can specify JSP param and name and value, and that will be given as a parameter to param value to the forwarded page. Okay, so directive. Directives are messages to JSP container in order to affect overall structure of the servlet. So you do not produce output into the current output stream. So it's not used to produce upstream. So these are directives. So we already have seen example directive, included directive. Okay. So there's a page directive, include directive, which we have already seen, and tag live directive. This is something that we are going to see later on when we are using tag libraries. And so page, communicate page dependent attributes and communicate these to the JSP container. So for example, if you want to import some classes, you can use this import directive, page and import. So these are page directives. So again, directives are used to give some instructions to the servlet container. So which classes are imported, and what MIME type is generated, and how multi-threading is handled, and what page handle unexpected errors. So this is something that we are going to cover in a few minutes. Okay, implicit object. So JSP page that has an access to certain implicit objects are always available without being declared first, because they actually created when JSP pages are converted into servlet code, as you probably have seen in our previous presentation. So these are implicit objects like a request object, response object, session object, application object, out. This is JSP writer and config, servlet config, and page context. Okay, so scope object. So the scope object concept is pretty much the same as we discussed in the servlet case. One thing that we have not discussed was page scope. So when you define an object as an attribute in the page scope, that will be accessible only in that page. So this is the session and application scope. Again, this is the same regardless whether you are talking about JSP and servlet. So here, each user will have his or her own session. So we have two users, and the first user has a session 1, and the second user have a session 2. Okay. So in the session object, whatever communications that are happening between client 1, user 1, with your application will be maintained in session 1, in session object belonging to client 1. Application context scope or application scope is that the scope attribute maintained in that application scopes are available to everyone as long as they are using accessing the same application. So this is actually showing the session, request, and page scope. Okay, so session scope is the largest, and then, well, actually the application scope is the largest, and then you have a session scope. So if a user is actually performing one request and response cycle, and the second request and response cycle, the attributes that are maintained in the session scope should be able to be accessible here. However, on the request scope is that if it actually forward, they are in fact in the same request scope. So whatever attributes that are specified, created in page 1 should be accessible in page 2. Page scope is the smallest. So in page, if you have the page scope attributes created in page 1, and then if you forward another page, this page should not be able to access those attributes. Okay, so actually I meant to give a demonstration after each of this. So why don't I do that? I thought I actually create a slide that actually have a divider slide, but looks like I didn't create a PDF file. So I'm going to actually try forward the scope object. Okay, so let's take a look at we'll take a look at include. Oh, well, let's do include and forward first. Okay, so include. This is very simple. The application. So here, this is an index.jsp page. So here we are including response.jsp page. Okay, which means that the output fragment created by response.jsp page will be included here, and this index.jsp page is still responsible for responding to the client. Okay, Now, response JSP page is just the output. Okay. The reason it's actually complaining about NetBeans is complaining about is that because it's not the valid HTML file, and that's perfectly fine because we are just including it. Okay. So let's try to run the application. So what you're going to see is that because index.jsp page is, so type something in here. So because index.jsp page still has a control, basically it actually gets the output from, this is from the response JSP page and it's included. Okay, and these things is still from index.jsp page. On the other hand, if you do forward, so this is index.jsp page, same code, but this time we are using forward. So now we are forwarding to response.jsp page. So response.jsp page, because it's actually the one that actually responds to the client, and this has to be valid HTML. Okay. So in fact, you cannot access, as you have seen here in the include case. Here we are just accessing username, right? Because this is actually part of, let's say, the index.jsp page. However, here, because it's a separate JSP page, you cannot access it like that. Okay. So what you have to do in this case is that you are going to save. You are going to save that username as page context attribute, meaning page scope object. Okay, and then you can actually this is not page scope. It has to be request scope. If it is a page scope, it's not going to be accessible in response.jsp page. Okay, so now I have it as a request scope, so that should be available. So let's run this application. So if I type some name, XX, well, something like this, and submit, then you're going to see that this is actually being accessed as an attribute. Now, if I change this one, we'll talk about this scope one more time, is like a page scope. Okay, and then try to run it. And type some name. Yeah, it's not accessible. Okay. Well, actually, let's make sure that we are actually using page scope as well. Okay. So just to make sure we are using page scope, the result is going to be the same because page scope attributes are only available in this case index.jsp page. Okay. So let's run. Still should be no. Okay. All right. Let me just change the code. Okay. Now that is include and forward. Now let's talk about the scope object. So here we have defined, this is index.jsp page, and this is the way that you can define an attribute in various scopes. So here I am creating the page scope attribute, okay, and I name it as a page scope attribute, and this one is request scope attribute, and this is a session scope attribute, and this is application scope attribute. And now I access those attributes here because it's the same page. I should be able to access them all, right? Okay. Now here I'm including response.jsp page. So in the response.jsp page, I'm trying to display all. Okay, because included page is just like this page, part of this page, you should be able to access them all as well. Okay. Now this another page. So in the response.jsp page, the index.jsp page, I'm also actually referencing another page, another JSP page. So in this case, another JSP page is trying to access it, and let's see the result, and I'll explain the result after running it. So you can see this page can certainly access all the attributes regardless of the scope because it's considered the same page. Now let's try to send some name, and you can see the included page. I mean, this is from a JSP page, right? So included page can access still those attributes. Now if I click another page, it actually calls another page. In this case, it cannot access the scope attributes and request the scope attribute, because it's different request. Okay. However, it can access session scope attribute and application scope attribute. Okay. All right. So now let's take a look at the forward. So in this case, we have pretty much the same code. So we defined these attributes, and here we are going to forward. Okay. And then another page is pretty much the same thing as we have seen. So let's run this guy, forward case. So here, let's actually do this. So now we're actually forwarding to forwarded page, and you can see because it's forwarding, it is actually same request scope. Okay, because it's still handling that same request. However, it cannot access the page request attribute. I mean the page scope attribute. Okay, so hopefully that clarifies. Okay, error handling is basically creating an exception error page. So basically in each of your JSP page, you can specify that this is the error page that I want to display if there is an error. Okay. Now in the error page.jsp page, you are going to specify whether this is in fact the error page or not, with is error page equals true. Okay, and in the error page you can also access exception object. So like this. So in my init destroy.jsp page, if there is an error, I want to display error page.jsp page, and so error page.jsp page, I have to specify this directive. Okay. So page space is error page equals true, and then you can display some exception message. So let's actually try error case. Okay, so this is the case. I'm going to run JSP examples. So we are going to try JSP 1.2, and here this is error page. So if I execute, and if I click this one, and it will display error message. So if you take a look at the code, error case. So this is the error page, meaning this is the whenever there is an error in this page, I want to display error page.jsp page. So if you take a look at error page.jsp page, it should say this page directive is error page equals true. Okay. All right. So that is the end of the presentation. So let me actually show you some hands-on lab exercises. Some of them we actually did it. JSP scripting is basically showing the how you can add Java code. So here we are actually performing. This is the declaration, right? Like this. Okay, it's just getting the using implicit object. Okay, and include and forward. That's something that I did it to you. I did demonstrate to you. And then we did the error page, and we did the scope object, and the exercise 5 is forwarding between JSP and Servlet. Okay, so you can forward between JSP and Servlet. So in this case, when you click JSP Servlet, JSP click here, and it's basically I've been invoked. It actually goes to the JSP to Servlet.jsp page, and it just displays I've been invoked by Servlet to JSP Servlet. Okay. So if you take a look at the code, this is the way that you are forwarding to some URL. Okay, so slash the /servlet to JSP, and this could be in fact JSP page or Servlet. So in this case, this is actually Servlet. So in our web.xml file, this servlet.jsp is basically servlet, right? Okay, and the servlet class is servlet.jsp. So this is the servlet.jsp code. So here we are basically setting the attribute, and then we are getting the we are doing a forward. So you are doing a forward to hello.jsp page. Okay. All right. So that's the end of the presentation. Let me just finish up.